It's always a little difficult making a video about a Philip K. Dick book. Maintaining a cohesive thread and through line through the video as you go through it can be extremely difficult. And the one time I did make a video about a Philip K. Dick book and I didn't have any notes at all, it went so far off the rails that it might just be the worst video I have personally ever made. And now that I'm working my way through the Valis trilogy, it's only getting harder. So for better or worse, here we go. The Divine Invasion is book 2 in the Valis trilogy, and it is a trilogy in the sense that it is more like a trilogy of loosely connected thoughts, themes, and ideas versus a trilogy that is the continuation of plots and characters. Or at least that's how I see it so far. I haven't actually read The Transmigration of Timothy Archer yet. Which also leads me right into the fact that this is my first read-through of this book, so this review will be a very surface-level review of the book. It's not going to be any type of a deep dive into the themes and ideas that are this book. Also, spoiler warning for this and Valis both, because I will be talking about both as I go through. Although this is the kind of Philip K. Dick book where I could literally lay out every single plot point in the entire book as it happens before you ever even read it, and it would not detract in any way, shape, or form from your enjoyment of the book, because the enjoyment that you get from this style of Philip K. Dick book, in my opinion, doesn't come from the plot. It comes from the experience of reading the book. If you've read a Philip K. Dick book, you'll probably know exactly what I mean. Anyway, this book, in comparison to Valis, is quite an interesting read, because whereas Valis had two main characters, both of which were Philip K. Dick, and he has continuous conversations with himself where he wrestles with the ideas of philosophy and religion and God, and tries to create this massive exegesis to explain everything, and it's just really in-your-face philosophizing from the first page to the last page. This one is not that. He basically has completely abandoned that format, and he's going to steer the ship back into very typical Philip K. Dick territory. It's a science fiction story about colonies on other planets and politics and artificial intelligence and parallel universes. And actually, this is exactly one of the ideas that was thrown around in Valis, and it was given very little lip service. But at one point in Valis, don't ask me to go find it in the book, because I would have to reread the entire book just to find it, because I didn't highlight it or anything, because I didn't think it was important until I read this book. But at one point in Valis, he makes some kind of theory that what if God was exiled from the planet by the devil, essentially, and forced to live out in exile on another planet. And now here we are with the Divine Invasion, and we have a book about exactly that idea. God has been banished to another planet, and he's going to send a man and a magically impregnated woman back to the planet Earth in order to bring the second coming. The primary difference between what we get in Valis and what we get in the Divine Invasion is, in Valis, you have the constant conversations between the two different Philip K. Dicks, and the constant questioning of, am I crazy? Are these theories crazy? And in this, it's like we took one of those theories, gave it life, and examined it very matter-of-factly instead of critically. Almost like in Valis, we are outside of Dick, watching Dick struggle with these theories. Whereas in this, it feels almost more like we're inside of Dick's mind, and we're just watching one of his theories play out. And that might even make sense for this book, considering that towards the end of Valis, he kind of goes up with a group of people that parrot all of his ideas back at him, and it makes him realize just how crazy everything that he's been saying this whole time is. Almost coming to the conclusion that he's crazy and none of this makes any sense. But then once he gets away from him and he gets back to himself and gets back to being left to his own devices and kind of gets stuck in his own mind again, he slowly descends right back into the madness that he was in throughout the rest of the book, and the book ends with him frantically diving headfirst back into all of his madness. And now here we are in this book, and it just feels like we are locked inside of his head, watching one of his insane theories play out in his mind. And in that sense, as far as flowing out of the concept and idea of the last book, it actually makes very good narrative and thematic sense. So what is this? Well, it starts out on a colony on another planet with some pretty typical Dick characters that interact in pretty typical Dick ways. One is Herb, and the other is Rebus? Ribus. Ribes. R-I-B-Ys. However the fuck you're supposed to say that. Anyway, God shows up in a burning control board, this world's version of the burning bush, and talks to Herb, and off we go. But none of this is actually happening because Herb has actually recently been into a car accident on the planet Earth, no less, not the foreign colony, and he's actually being held in a form of hibernation or stasis, awaiting new organ transplants so that he can be regenerated. And while he's in this stasis, he's going to have a dream of the previous 6 years of his life. So we are to assume that this all actually happened to him, but we're not seeing the events of what happened to him. We're seeing the dream of what happened to him while he's being held in stasis because he has recently been in a car accident. While he's being held in stasis, we get to see the Son of God being raised by the prophet Elijah. And even after he comes out of stasis, we now have our main character of the Son of God. He will eventually meet a little girl who is actually an alternate reality version of himself from a parallel universe. She will eventually take him over into the parallel universe where he will meet alternate versions of all the characters that we've had so far up until this point in the story. Some characters that were dead in our world are alive here. Some characters that were famous here are nobodies here. And at one point we realized that Belial in this world is taking the form of a goat, and that goat has been locked in a cage. When the kids find him, he tricks them into letting him out, which releases a wave that will now travel through the entire universe. And the goat will ultimately visit every person individually, and they will individually have to choose good or evil, the goat or not the goat. And if all of this sounds crazy, it's probably because it is. And as crazy as all of that sounds, I would personally argue that this book is actually much more approachable than Valis was. And that is essentially just because this has a clear plot. I mean, it's not clear, and it's extremely schizophrenic, and you can barely keep track of it as it's going, but it's a much more traditional book in the sense that we're going to create a group of characters. This group of characters are going to travel through a series of situations and scenarios, and we're going to bury and embed the plots and themes and ideas within a character-driven narrative like every other piece of fiction of all time has ever been, instead of the weird, constant conversations with himself and philosophizing and beating you over the head with it that Valis was. As much as I love that book, it's not a typical read, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I'm not even saying that I fully understand the thoughts and themes and ideas that were actually taking place in this. I'm not sure I understood what he was trying to say. I understand the plot and what the characters went through. I don't understand the underlying theme that he was trying to highlight. I am almost at a loss for what I was supposed to take away from that, if I'm being honest. But at the same time, I would say that this is actually an easier book to recommend reading than Valis was, because immediately you get about a chapter into Valis, you're like, man, I don't know who I'd tell to read this, because this shit is dense and it is very, I can't think of the word. Inaccessible, I guess, is the word I would like to use there. Whereas this is just much more straightforward sci-fi romp, so it's easier to recommend, but I guess you kind of have to. Do you have to read Valis to read this? I don't know. Either way, I'd say that this is probably an easier book to recommend to people than Valis was. Although, if I'm being honest, I think I personally enjoyed Valis more just because I was so interested in those conversations that he was having and his thoughts and ideas and all of his theories. I personally find that kind of thing utterly fascinating. So as much as it was far less of an actual narrative story like this was, I kind of personally enjoyed it more, even though as far as a rating, if I were to rate the two of those books, I would probably give them the same rating, even though I personally kind of enjoyed the Valis a little bit more just because I like getting into the nitty-gritty of that kind of stuff. Although I think I'm definitely the minority in that one. I think the most people are not like me, and most people are like, yeah, that this one was better, If you made it through Valis and then even made it to the Divine Invasion, you were probably like, oh, this is like a real breath of fresh air after reading that last one. At least that's how I would imagine most people are. And to be honest, after that, it really does feel like he took a step back and kind of went back to his previous way of storytelling and expressing his ideas. You know, like schizophrenic storytelling that goes in so many different directions that it barely holds together, if it holds together at all. An imaginative fever dream of ideas that's so engrossing that you just can't help but have fun while you're reading it. Even though the characters are paper thin and almost never realized in a relatable way whatsoever. But goddamn if the book isn't dripping with so much character and personality and humor that other authors, quite frankly, probably only dream of. Anyway, at the end of the day, if I had to rate this book, I think it would probably very comfortably sit at about an 8.5. As always, everybody, if you are interested in supporting me, myself, this channel, and what I do here, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.